Hello, you're watching the press preview on Sky News, a time when we take a look at the best stories from tomorrow's papers. And joining me tonight, political commentator Joe Phillips and Tony Grew, parliamentary editor for ePolitics.com. I'm not having much luck with you tonight, Tony, am I? Before we have a chat, we're just going to run through the front pages of the papers. We start with The Guardian. Leads with the allegations of abuse made against British troops by Iraqi civilians. Senior executives at the BBC questioning the judgment of the Director General. That's in The Independent. UK banking giants, HSBC and RBS, have warned the UK economy faces a bumpy ride. That's in the FT. Telegraph says the Duke of York has attacked the MOD, calling it hopeless. 6 prisons facing closure under government plans to send fewer criminals to jail. That's on the front of the Times. Shameful is the Mail's headline, asking whether RMPs can sink any lower. The Express leads with controversial cleric Abu Hamza and a court ruling that he can keep his British passport. The Mirror leads with the X Factor. The Star says Jordan could be in trouble over her driving. So let's talk through those with Joe and with Tony. And you spend all your life hanging about the corridors of power, don't you, Tony?
And the bars, yes.
So what do you make of the bars, indeed? So what do you make of the Daily Mail's front page?
Well, I have to say it's a big exclusive for the Daily Mail. They've got a story here that everyone knew about from today, and they've got their own splash. An alleged assault by a member of Parliament on someone who works in Parliament in a bar called the Sports and Social, where there was karaoke on Thursday night, so that may have exacerbated the situation. I'm not sure.
I think, as we said earlier, it was not just mineral water being taken there.
It wasn't, and the gentleman who's alleged that he was assaulted by Paul Farrelly, who's the MP for Newcastle-under-Lyme and a former Observer journalist. He's a well-known figure around Westminster. Most people who work in the building would know who he is. I'm a bit shocked by the allegation, I have to say, because I haven't never seen Paul Farrelly hit anyone. And one thing I do want to say about it is I think the Daily Mail, while this is an important story, and obviously the Phil Willis story is a terrible story, I think they kind of need to change the record. We've got 227 bright new MPs, and they haven't been punching anyone. The worst they've done so far is been too drunk to vote. So I think branding the whole House of Commons as shameful is something that the Daily Mail goes to a little bit too quickly for me.
I mean, we do live in a parliamentary democracy. I mean, saying the worst they've done has been too drunk to vote. It doesn't really paint them in the best light, does it?
Give them a break, that's all I have to say.
No, I agree with you up to a point, and I think, things like this and the expenses scandal do not help engaging people in the democratic process, which I think, we all care hugely about. But I think the Phil Willis case is considerably different to a drunken punch-up in the Commons.
This is much more serious.
He was a minister. He's not a child. He will have had an election agent. He will have known the rules, and there is enough there's enough there written and telling you what you can and can't do during an election that somebody, somewhere along the line, should have said something.
I completely agree, but the thing about this case is that this was treated with absolute shock at Westminster today. I mean, complete shock. I haven't seen shock like it since...
What, shock at the result?
Well, no, just shock that this had happened. We haven't had a case like this in 99 years, and I think a lot of journalists had just forgotten that it was happening, had put it to the back of their minds, and then suddenly this judgment comes out. It has some really serious implications about the way in which campaigns are going to be conducted.
I was going to say, let's be clear about this. I mean, we talk about dirty campaigning and things, and when it comes to an election, whether it's a general election, whether a by-election, or indeed whether it's a local council election, candidates do say things and make claims about other candidates. Well, I mean, that does happen. Where do you draw the line?
And I have to be honest with you, from conversations... Well, from conversations with Tory and with Labour MPs, the one thing they're united in is their hatred of the way the Lib Dems campaign. I know that they're the ones that are often, at the forefront of allegations that they've done dirty campaigning, though all parties do it, and obviously this is proved by the Phil Willis thing. I think what it is going to do is it's going to hopefully have some sort of chilling effect on some of the more outrageous things that are said by all parties and campaigns.
Yeah, and I think that there needs to be, but, we don't want some anodyne, sanitised thing. I mean, I think what's interesting, and you quite rightly say, that people had sort of forgotten about this, and I think when it first started, people go, oh, for goodness sake, this is a bad loser. He lost by 103 votes. Yeah. This is ridiculous. It's never going to happen. So I guess that's part of the shock.
That's where the bombshell comes from. Yeah. No one thought this would be the outcome.
Is there a sense of naivety, perhaps, in that? I mean, certainly Baroness Varsi was saying today for the Conservatives, people knew what the allegations were. They know what had been said in the literature because it was there for everyone to see. We knew this case was happening. We knew the judgment was pending. And yet this man was still made a shadow minister.
Well, first of all, I don't think Baroness Varsy's in any position to comment. Some of the leaflets that she handed out in the 2005 election were disgustingly homophobic, so, you know, she should look to herself first. I think it was a huge mistake to appoint him as a shadow minister. Clearly, we all knew this was coming down the track. The Liberal Democrat conference was just full of talk about this case and people trying to fundraise for it. So I don't understand why they took that choice. Maybe they decided that innocent until proven guilty.
Yeah, but it's a bit stupid, isn't it? This early on, of Ed Miliband.
I wouldn't comment on the stupidity or otherwise of Ed Miliband.
I think they've done very well to react quickly, but it is a bit daft.
Well, it's funny they sent Harriet out as well to just say he's out of the party. He's dead.
Dear old Harriet, yes. Who's cracked one joke, you know.
She's done very well.
She's done it,
She's done very well.
She's made a joke.
They're all. I mean, this is the problem when you look at what people do in their own right. I mean, certainly I was struck today by Simon Hughes making lots of comments about how dreadful this was, and of course it's his party that would appear to have lost out as a result of what happened in this particular constituency, but. 1983, Peter Tatchell, by-election in Bermondsey. And I mean, that was a situation where Simon Hughes was actually apologised, back in 2006 for what he did.
What about the Smethwick by-election? That was the Tories at the same time with their candidate who had an extremely racist slogan at the time. I'm sure we all remember that. Got elected and ended up staying as a Tory MP for 25 years.
I noticed, looking at the inside pages of the Daily Mail, and one thing, down at the bottom, poll dilemma for the Tories. This is interesting, Joe, isn't it? That,
very interesting.
Obviously this is that no one's pulling out to have a clear run for any of the other.
No, exactly. And we've got the Tories and the Liberal Democrats running the country. They're the coalition government. You would think, therefore, that the Tories might stand back and let the Lib Dems have a clear run. They can't. They won't. They might do a soft campaign. And we were just talking about it earlier. I mean, do we think the Liberal Democrats are going to win because the people there think, well, no, this is the guy who should have won and we really like him and he's local and so on and so forth. He was robbed. Labour, I don't think, have got a chance.
Well, I'm not so sure. I don't know. I don't have any expert knowledge into it. I mean, the one thing I would say is that despite the desires of modernisers like Nick Bowes to have some sort of formal electoral pact at the next election between the Lib Dems and the Conservatives, it's not going to happen. And I actually think the Tories would be a lot more comfortable with it than the Lib Dems. I think the Lib Dems know the ones that they're the ones that are going to have to struggle to articulate their identity at the next election, at this by-election. Don't forget that we're having elections across Scotland and Wales and council elections across England next May, and possibly an AB referendum that the Lib Dems may not win.
Well, so much is going to happen.
You're going to have to get your lines of attack and defence.
Exactly, but a lot of it depends on the economy. If the economy is improving, then that's fine. At the moment, if there was an election tomorrow, the Lib Dems would be punished for tuition fees and everything else, and the inevitable disappointment that people feel. But, give it 6 months and see what happens.
Before we move on to other issues tonight, I just wondered what you both thought about the general view of MPs, because obviously, whatever the rights and wrongs of the expenses scandal, those sort of issues do create a sort of nationwide view of what MPs are doing. The idea they were all on the gravy train, they were taking us for our money. Now, of course, most MPs would say that that's absolutely not the case, and you can see their arguments for making that case. But with these sort of stories coming up on the front of the papers, where does it leave us? Because the new intake, the general election, the huge new intake we saw, was meant to draw a line. It was meant to give us a fresh start and restore trust and faith in politics. Joe?
I think, I actually have a lot of respect for people who go into politics. You don't go in it to line your own pocket. It's jolly hard work. Your life is not your own. Every weekend you're doing something in the constituency. You're in Parliament. You're running the machine. If you're in a smaller party, when I was working for Paddy Ashton, we only had a handful of MPs, so everybody was having to, carry the load. Not least of all dealing with Paddy's endless phone calls and things. But it is, it's hard work, isn't it? It's not an easy ride. It can be immensely boring. It can be immensely dull. I think it's a real shame that people like this end up doing damage to other people. But, if you've ever dealt with your own MP, you'll know that most of the time they're reasonable.
I think from talking to MPs, the reaction they tend to get from a lot of their constituents is that all these MPs have got their snout in the trough. Not you, obviously. Not the local MP, not the one I know, not the one that helps me, but MPs as a class. I think they're also caught in a really difficult place at the moment because, we have an insatiable 24-hour news, celebrity culture, and in a lot of ways they're being treated as celebrities. 30 years ago, the idea of a Labour MP punching someone in a bar wouldn't even have made the papers in any way. It wasn't a regular occurrence, but what I mean is, this is a celebrity story as much as it's a political story.
Yeah, exactly.
Let's move on to the Telegraph. Joe, what do you make of Prince Andrew's comments about the MOD?
I think Prince Andrew has not been hugely helpful to the government, and I should imagine that his mum, the Queen, who's also pictured on the front of Telegraph grinning, but not at his comments, will also take a pretty dim view. I mean, he's criticised the MOD and talked about them being too lazy to get off their backsides to do anything and order the right armoured trucks that the service personnel say they want. He's broken the protocol, but, it's not the first time. His elder brother, Prince Charles, has always been doing it. But, this is a very political story, Ministry of Defence spending. And, of course, Prince Andrew served in the Falklands, which is a long time ago now. And as far as I can tell, these days doesn't do an awful lot except for sort of touting British business and playing golf.
Well, so the touting British business might be increasingly important at the moment.
The touting British business, of course, but, I'm not sure how terribly helpful this is. I'm sure there are lots of chaps in uniform who will say, good on you, Andy, well done, you're saying stuff that we can't say. But it will inevitably, open the old sores about the royals and what they should say and whether they should get involved in these things.
So do you think MPs are going to be wringing their hands?
Over what Prince Andrew says? I don't think so. I mean, he's entitled to his opinion, obviously, but he may as well come out and tell us about the X Factor. I don't think politicians are going to pay a huge amount of attention to what's in the front page of the Telegraph because Prince Andrew said it. However, that being said, I think it's a win-win for the royal family. As you say, they've always been very strong and vocal supporters of the armed forces. They've got into scraps with the government before over cuts and over merging of regiments, and I think it makes them, from their point of view, they're standing up for the ordinary troops, and that can never be a bad thing.
Let's finish off this section, Joe. I mean, You've had a hand in politics, you've had a hand in media as well for a long time.
Many things.
You've done a bit of it all. The Independent, just one of many papers with big stuff on the BBC. This strike is underway.
Yes.
Everything was disrupted today.
Completely.
And now questions over the DG.
Well, yes, Mark Thompson's been very, very heavily criticised in a lecture given by Stephen Mitchell, one of the sort of number twos, head of news at the BBC. But, this strike is just the end of a bad week for them because they've had to apologise, quite rightly, for absolutely appalling allegations that they made against the Band-Aid Trust and Bob Geldof. It took them 7 or 8 months to come out with that apology. Absolutely ridiculous.
We covered that in the press preview on Wednesday when I was last in. You know Bob very well, don't you? I mean, put it into context for us how personal the whole Band-Aid issue has been for him and how infuriated he's been by what he heard.
I mean, it is disgusting, and it's what Michael Grade himself, who's a trustee of the Band-Aid Trust, said, and a former Director General of the BBC. This sort of stuff, this completely false allegation, undoes a quarter of a century of really good work. Because if people then go... I mean, it's a bit like politicians, if you say one person does this, so therefore they're all the same... one person hears something and goes, oh, well, all the money goes to this, such and such. I mean, the BBC have handled that absolutely diabolically. And, of course, the story here is about Mark Thompson, Director General, who signed a letter to the Business Secretary, Vince Cable, calling for an investigation into BSkyB's takeover by News Corporation, which puts his journalists in a very difficult position in terms of impartiality.
Got to be said, from the Palace of Westminster today, Tony. I mean, tell us absolutely impartially, most of the monitors, what news channel do they watch in Parliament?
Well, it's a mixture between Sky and Sky HD.
Yeah, exactly.
Excellent. You have to say. So at least the parliamentarians haven't missed out on much today.
No.
Well, no, I mean, the more
serious,
rational and truthful point, obviously, is that the BBC strike, I don't think it really helps them. I think if we lived in a world where we had 3 channels, this would be a problem, but we don't. We live in a multi-channel universe. We've got Sky and lots of other channels that people can go and get their news from. So I think in TV, in terms of impact, I think it's going to have very little impact. But I do think, so just one other point, I do think, though, that this is about the Director General. I think people have got their guns for him. This man earns nearly £1 million a year. That's completely unacceptable in the public service, and I think at some point, sooner or later, he's going to be forced out.
Well, we shall wait and see. We'll leave it there for the time being. Thank you both for now, but coming up, we're going to be finding out about the country that's handing out free cheese. Stay with us.